something like, do you have permission to record? Yeah. All right. So yeah, go ahead and just get started whenever you're ready.
Wait, so were you gonna? I don't know if you gave me the questions, but
Oh, I just emailed you to emailed the questions that you had asked to you just now. I can't drop them in the chat for, again, there's a lot of legal hurdles and defenses and stuff since we're a government agency. It's not as easy to be like, if you were in WDFW, I could just share them with you, but since you're not, I can't just drop it in the chat. So also, it's funny, it says WWE. I'm not a wrestling organization. Sorry, I should close the transcript. It's going to distract me. There we
go. All right. So today I have Brian Turner. I'm interviewing him. And yeah, I guess let's get started. So I guess I've already kind of said your name, but what is your name, and kind of tell us a little bit about your job? And
sure. Yeah, no worries. So my name is Dr. Brian Turner. I'm the research scientist with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's Aquatic Invasive Species Unit. So the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit deals with anything classified as an aquatic invasive species. Now, what that means is it's an animal that's been brought from one location to another where it's not normally found, and it causes some sort of problem. For Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, we define that specifically as animals, though you can have invasive species that are plants, but my work specifically deals with animals. And so as the researcher, I do a lot of work in sort of writing up papers and plans and reports and talking to folks, but I also develop research plans. I develop sampling methodologies. I analyze data. I do a lot of different things for my job. So yeah.
And what got you into your career?
So it's a funny story. I basically, in college, I couldn't decide if I wanted to do theater, if I wanted to do science, and then I decided I wanted to do something biological, but it had to be either an invasive species, invertebrate, because I always liked invertebrates, or marine. And my sister sent me an article about a work being done on a marine invasive species, particularly the European green crab was what it was. And so I just started doing that. And then over the years, I've worked on projects related to quagga and zebra mussels, nutria. I've done a little work with bullfrogs, not a ton, but just kind of gotten roped into the whole topic.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And let's see, what would you say is the most interesting part of the job?
Well, I think the thing I like about it is that it's multifaceted in terms of I get to deal with a lot of different species. So I'm the only researcher in our unit, and so I cover everything that we cover. So the biggest priorities for Washington Department's AIS unit is right now are green crabs and quagga zebra mussels. Quagga zebra mussels aren't present in Washington at this time, but we're concerned about them. But it also means I get to work with things like bullfrogs, and I get to work with nutria, and I get to work with anything that kind of falls into that broad category. And so it's neat to get to play with all these different kinds of animals. And then also it's interesting to work with people throughout the state, as opposed to, say, I used to work in a college, and so I would just work with my students and I'd work with other professors, but I was pretty isolated. And now I get to work with all different groups from the various tribes in Washington, all the other agencies, the general public, all sorts of folks.
So it's very much like kind of more of a, I don't know, organization, like open to a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's more like maybe of a volunteer. I mean, you probably have a lot of volunteers.
Well, actually, for various reasons, we don't have a lot of active volunteers. But for example, the green crab program, I know we're talking about bullfrogs, but green crab is our big thing now. We do it all statewide. And so we talk with people from all different walks of life about that. There's a lot of legal issues in terms of volunteering. There's safety and insurance and stuff like that. So that's why we don't have an active volunteer program. But we get to work with a lot of folks doing the same kind of work as us, and it's really
kind of acts. Yeah,
it's sort of similar in that way.
So yeah, now let's get into bullfrogs.
Yes.
So I guess the first question I have is, which a lot of people might be wondering, is what makes them different than other frogs? Because I know, a lot of people think like, bullfrogs, they look very similar to other frogs. So what's the difference? A lot of people think it's kind of the same thing. So
Sure. So there's a couple of things. The first is that, at least in Washington and in the Western United States, as I mentioned, they're an invasive species. So they're originally from the eastern regions of the United States. They were moved over to Washington in the 1930s. Basically, during the Depression, people tried raising them to sell as frog legs. People also tried just releasing them so they could have a harvestable food source. Neither of those really panned out, but now we have these established populations of the frogs. In the way they really are different, though, from Washington frogs is their size. So a bullfrog is at full size, they're about 4.5 inches long. And I'm talking about like from snout to stump, not the legs. If you stretch out the legs, it's like 8 inches. But that's about twice as large as any of our native frogs. And so as a result, they are far more of they're a much more effective predator, and in particular can have a strong impact on native species, because bullfrogs basically can eat anything smaller than them, including things like ducklings. So they're pretty aggressive predators in their own way. So if you see a really big frog, that's a hint. But if you really want to know if it's a bullfrog, the best way to check is they have these really prominent eardrums that you can see on the side of their head. So all frogs, that's their ears, but it's really big and obvious for the bullfrogs, and they have this little fold that goes over the side of their ear, and that skin fold is something you'll only see on the bullfrogs. And then there's another invasive species a frog that has that, but then they have this other fold to look for. So really, it's eardrum, fold, big. That's what you want to look for when you're looking for a bullfrog. They also
don't they also have markings on their back, or?
They can. That's less reliable. Like, its color and markings, generally speaking, can vary a lot. Like, if you think about any animal, there can be a lot of variety in coloration. So it's not always the best way. But those more distinct physical characteristics that aren't as easily lost are useful. One other thing that you can do, and I'm going to try to play this for you. If you can hear it, if you can't hear it, let me know. No, it's not working. Oh well. Actually, I'm just gonna do this real quick here. Share screen. Oh, come on. There we go. Share. I just include computer sound. Oh, I can't share sound. Okay, never mind. I'll send you a link, but they have this really distinct, like kind of deep, bassy kind of croak. And so that's really unique too in the area. None of our frogs have that kind of big kind of sound. That's actually how they get the name bullfrogs. They sound kind of like these bigger animals than they are.
Yeah, I think I heard of that. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I would say those are the main ways they're different.
So I was also going to ask you, what do you do with bullfrogs at your organization? Because I know you talked about other aquatic species, but what about them specifically?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, WDFW is the lead agency for the management of aquatic invasive species in Washington. Bullfrogs are classified as what we call a prohibited species level 3. And what that boils down to is you're not allowed to sell or distribute or possess or release bullfrogs without permission from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so, you can't buy them, you can't sell them because of their impacts. If you wanted to be involved in that, you'd have to get special permission from us. So part of our job is giving permits for people who say want to do research with bullfrogs or may want to have them for some other reason. We are concerned about their impacts. However, right now, with the limited resources we have to focus on other species, primarily like European green crab and prevention methods for zebra and quagga mussels. However, a couple of things that we do are that we receive reports from the public. So if anyone thinks they see a bullfrog, we ask them to take a picture and then email it to us. There's also actually a WDFW aquatic invasive species app, and you can have that on your iPhone or your Android, and you can take a picture and then submit it to us. We then identify to confirm that it is a bullfrog, and if it is, we track in all those reports so we can keep an idea of their distribution in the state should we ever need to take action, or if we ever need to give that information to other folks. The other thing we do is we get questions for folks about What do I do about bullfrogs, and how can I manage them? And I should say that people are allowed to harvest bullfrogs without a license in Washington. You don't need like a hunting permit or anything like that. But we can provide some guidance and information for either, people like you who just want to have some knowledge about bullfrogs, or maybe actively wanting to remove them from, say, like, if you own a property and you've got a pond and you think there's bullfrogs there, what do I do? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And do you have like a link for people can go, like with permits or whatever? Yeah.
So I have in the document I sent you has links to the different laws. It also has for the email. The email for us is just AIS, that stands for Aquatic Invasive Species, at DFW. That's Department of Washington, Department of Fish and Wildlife .washington.gov. So or
so
AIS,
that's how they can report bullfrogs. Yeah,
and any other aquatic invasive species. So any I should say, you have one. Actually, I'll let you ask the question since it's your thing. But
yeah. So next question was, what can people do to save them or deal with bullfrogs?
Yeah. So the first thing, the one I recommend, is to take a photo and send it to us, again using the Washington Invasives app, or to email us at ais@dfw.wa.gov. We do request that people take a picture, just because then we can confirm it. There's always the issue of without a photo, we can't confirm what something is. And especially because I know in a lot of cases people want to then, maybe try to capture it or remove it. We want to make sure it's actually a bullfrog rather than, I don't know, say just a red-legged frog or something like that. If people are interested in removing bullfrogs from their location, or if you want to harvest them for, food or anything like that, that is allowed. No license is required to harvest bullfrogs using permitted methods. So things like angling, like fishing line, a hand dip net, using a spear, or you can even use a bow and arrow. By law, you can, bow and arrow hunt bullfrogs.
That's fun.
You just have to kill them. You can't release them again into the wild once you've captured them. But if you want specific guidance on how to manage small bullfrog populations, we have some information available. Or you can use that same email, the ais@dfw.wa.gov, to just, contact us, and we are happy to help as well.
What was the other thing? Oh, I was going to ask you just general, like, history about bullfrogs, or why they've become so, like, I don't know, endangered.
Yeah, well, they're not endangered. The thing about bullfrogs, and in general, actually all invasive species, is they are a couple things they all tend to, they tend to have in common is this thing where they're fairly tolerant of a wide range of conditions. So bullfrogs can do well under a wide range of temperatures, and they are pretty tolerant to different hydrodynamic regimes. And by that I mean, they can handle different periods of wet and dry. And so as long as it's not super dry all the time, they're fine. But the main thing is they fill a niche in the ecosystem that's not already there. As I mentioned, bullfrogs are pretty effective predators, so they can eat a wide variety of things. They aren't dependent on, like, say, a couple of organisms that meet a certain criteria. They can pretty much eat anything as long as it'll fit in their mouths. And so they're never really hard up for food wherever they go. And so that's proven to be a very effective thing for them. And so that's one of the reasons they do so well. We're also concerned about them too, though, because diseases are pretty rampant among amphibians, and there's always the concern that bullfrogs could serve as a vector for those diseases. And bullfrogs have proven to be pretty destructive in other systems where they've been introduced as well.
Yeah, especially with their eating habits.
Yeah. One thing I would like to stress, though, is aside from bullfrogs, we do have a lot of aquatic invasive species that we're of concern. So the best practice is, if you see something that you think is odd or unusual, or maybe some things you've never seen before, you should always feel free to take a photo and send it to us, because we want to know. We get a lot of photos that are just like something totally normal, but we like getting those images. We like people reporting what they think is going on, because we can't be everywhere. And so if we get 100,000 emails that are all, native stuff, but then one invasive, that's still beneficial to us, because that's something we wouldn't have detected without help from the public. So we're always asking folks, please feel free to send us detections or things you think are detections, so we're aware, because there's nothing we can do if we don't know what's going on. So.
Yeah. Is there also a concern that it could go to humans, or no? Is that
No,
not?
the diseases with bullfrogs are very specific to amphibians. These are not a concern for these aren't human vectored diseases. They're very much just for amphibians.
But it probably could very much affect the population, of bullfrogs. Yeah.
Yeah, as we talked about already, amphibians are a pretty vulnerable group of organisms given just their life, and so the potential for certain bacteria and things to be spread and fungi to be spread among amphibians is always a huge concern. So,
and another question is, what do you want people to take away from this interview?
Again, I think it's just mostly to understand, it's important to kind of keep an eye out for anything that might seem unusual, and if so, let us know. Again, there's never any harm in saying, "Hey, I saw this weird thing. What is it?" I'd much rather get a million emails that say ask me what something is, and I can just tell you it's a regular red-legged frog or something, as opposed to a bullfrog. And then also just to be careful, right? I know a lot of folks, as we mentioned, people want to help. And so the first thought is, this is something I don't recognize, and so I'm going to kill it so that I can help the ecosystem. But it's very common to misidentify something, or maybe take an action that, while you don't intend to harm something, you might. So like if you go tromping around in a wetland trying to find bullfrogs, you could be damaging the wetland just by tromping around. And so thinking carefully about what you want to do and what needs to be done before you take action, so that even though well-intentioned, your actions don't have any additional negative consequences. So.
Yeah, it's not highly suggested for people to, you'd probably rather you guys kill them, probably, right?
Or at least, like I said, with bullfrogs, we don't take action because there isn't the resources, unfortunately, for us to do so. And the techniques that exist are only effective in sort of small, isolated locations. So like if you have a pond on your property, sure. Can we get rid of bullfrogs from the entirety of Washington? No, because that's just too big of a scale. But if you talk with us, we're happy to provide whatever guidance and assistance and information we can to help make sure that you're taking action in an effective and responsible way, rather than just, hoping for the best.
Yeah, and one final question is there any other parts of WDFW that could help besides your division?
We do have folks who are not in the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit who deal with amphibians and other wildlife, but they're primarily looking at it from the perspective of protecting native wildlife. And so we do have people who are herpetologists and experts on frogs, primarily focusing again on the conservation of native species. And there are, depending on where you go in the state, there's other local programs that may be dealing with bullfrogs as well. But I can only speak on behalf of my unit and this department. So.
But yeah, I guess. But could people get help from them? I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It most likely would be then directed back to us, because again, under law, we're the ones who do the permitting and the stuff related specifically to bullfrogs. But it's not as if there aren't others who aren't interested and couldn't be able to provide information as well.
All right. Well, thanks for sitting down with us today. And I think it'll be helpful, hopefully, for some people to understand how to deal with them. So
no problem. I thank you for the time. All right, now I'm going to figure out how to stop this recording. Let's see. More, record and transcribe. Stop recording. Stop.